DJ Leroy.
Night Watchman, how you doing, buddy?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, man. So, did you see the Grammys at all?
I did.
Okay. You're still a member of the Bayhive, is that correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Even though, I do have to say, Harry Styles' album is definitely tight. That's what I'm just saying, okay?
Okay, so you've been thrown out of the Bayhive.
you just had to go there.
The swarm is coming for you. I would suggest you stay indoors.
Well, having said that, you know what? We had a great show last week, and we certainly do know we were talking about the events unfolding in Memphis, and also talk about police reform. But the show was interesting because we had all folks of color law enforcement.
Yes.
So this time, you know what? Let's further this discussion, but let's have attorneys, defense attorneys specifically, to speak about this. What do you think?
Great idea. Do you know any?
I may have a few. As a matter of fact, we certainly do know one of our returning guys who's been here before many times, and that, of course, is Professor Wallace Ford. Yes.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
And I know you've also written a few things, not just one, a few things regarding this particular issue. So we're going to dive into that. Okay. How's that?
Oh, excellent. Look forward to it. Thank you.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. And so, a Night Watchman, I don't want you to get on me because sometimes, yes, there is nepotism. Okay.
Listen, I wasn't going to say anything if you weren't, but go right ahead.
but none other than someone I'm very, very proud of, my cousin out of Tallahassee, Florida, Mutaqee Akbar. Bring him out. Yes. All right.
How you doing, buddy? I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. And then last but not least is someone who actually, funny enough, my son had interned at one point, and he said, "Dad, you don't believe how much evidence was buried," and he'll tell about one of his more famous cases, and that is Jonathan Moore. Bring him out.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
All right. So gentlemen, we're going to actually go into a discussion about the unfolding events in Memphis. But I'd like to start off to actually hear your backgrounds in terms of, let's say, the legal profession, how you got into it, and then after that, we'll start to ask some of those particular questions about police brutality and police reform. So, Professor Ford, start us off.
Yes. Again, greetings. It's always a pleasure to be here. In answer to your background question, I am both a graduate of Dartmouth College and Harvard Law School. And when I was at Harvard Law School, I actually prepared a prisoner's rights manual for then Congressman Rangel while I was still at the college. Coming to New York City, I was a member of and then president of what was then called the Harlem Lawyers Association, the predecessor of now the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. And in that regard, we were, definitely involved with various issues involving just human rights and civil rights in particular issues. Sadly, police brutality has been part of the American story before there was even a United States of America. And so there's that. In the last couple of decades, I've been pretty much involved in higher education. And these days, I'm a tenured professor at Medgar College, which is part of the City University of New York. And I teach courses involving, I shouldn't say obviously, but criminal justice and how the criminal law operates. And I'm looking forward to this conversation with colleagues because I think there's some unspoken truths that need to be spoken. But really, the most important aspect I would submit is, okay, what now? Because we are anesthetized to these occurrences, to be sure. So how do we answer the question, what now?
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Mutaqee, tell us background and story.
Yes, sir. I'm in Tallahassee, Florida, graduated from Morehouse College undergrad, went to University of Miami for law school.
Yes.
And, after graduating from University of Miami, I started my career at the Public Defender's Office in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I was one of those young attorneys who Initially, I was trying to run away from criminal defense, but I was drawn to it just as an intern in law school, because when I went into the courtrooms, I would see, on one side of the courtroom, people that looked like me, and on the other side of the courtroom, they didn't look like me. And usually it was the defendants that looked like me, and everybody else, from the prosecutor to the judge to even the defense attorneys that did not look like me. And so I wanted to go in and just try to make an impact and help the people who look like me and help them navigate the system. Since then, I've been doing criminal defense work, and doing that work just kind of like push you into civil rights, because everything dealing with criminal defense is dealing with civil rights and policing and all kind of issues that go on in our community, and that's kind of pushed me into. I'm currently serving as president of the Tallahassee Branch of the NAACP.
Nice.
As well, where we of course address a lot of these civil rights issues that's going on. So I've been doing it for 18 years now, and represented people from driving with a suspended license to murder cases.
Wow.
And one of the things I say all the time is that if I can do the work in the community that can kind of pretty much drive me out of business, which was reduce crime, in a way, I would prefer to do that than keep fighting in the system.
I hear you. Beautiful. Well said. Well said. Jonathan, my man, do tell.
Yes. Well, I've been a lawyer for a long time, longer than 18 years, for sure. But I started out as a criminal defense lawyer in Chicago, but quickly turned to doing civil rights, which really is the other side of the coin of criminal defense work. Because oftentimes our civil rights cases arise from the context of a criminal encounter, and oftentimes involve having to defend against false charges of resisting arrest and that kind of stuff, and they turn into a civil rights case. So I've been doing civil rights work for quite a long time. I got involved on sort of my practice has evolved into a sort of a systematic attack on the way the police do their work. I was the lead counsel in the stop-and-frisk case here in New York City, which was historic in the sense that it wasn't a settlement, it wasn't a consent decree. We went to trial, and we went a 10-week trial. It was back in 2013. Many of you may remember that. Up to the de Blasio election, where he had his son doing commercials about how bad stop and frisk was.
Yes.
But we ended up with a finding by the federal court that the NYPD had engaged in a policy and practice of racial profiling for a number of years. So that's one part of the work I do. I also represent individual folks who have been the victims of police misconduct. I represented the family of Eric Garner. We all know was a victim of a chokehold on Staten Island. I represented the Exonerated Five in their wrongful conviction claims against the city, which was successfully concluded back in 2016. After these young men who had gone into jail at 14 and 15, by they were in their 40s, they got a resolution. So
yes,
hardly a satisfying thing in terms of how it affected their life, but nevertheless an important victory. And I will note that in the next upcoming elections, one of the Exonerated Five, Yusef Salaam, is actually running for city council.
That is correct. Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
And so that's that. I come from that perspective of looking at how the police institutionally deal with these issues, and so that would be my perspective to add here.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, Night Watchman, you want to say anything?
No, I had a little background noise. I'm going to let you take it.
Okay. So, Professor Ford, one of the things that you kind of mentioned, that this is not anything new. That this is systemic. It's been ongoing. So, please, can you discuss your thoughts on the has there been a recent rise, or has it always been there in terms of brutality?
Before there were before the cell phones had a video capacity, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say there's hundreds, probably thousands of incidents that we'll never know about because nobody had a camera. There was, there's a your word against mine kind of situation, and the great blue wall of silence. But as I was writing in my weekly column, point of view column, which I had put in quick plug, it's www.thewallaceford.com. Speaking about the situation in Memphis, we have to understand history is really important. The police forces in what became the United States, because they existed in the colonial era, had two major purposes. One was to subdue or drive out the indigenous people from whatever colonies that existed at that time, and the other was to protect white people from runaway slaves, from slave revolts, slave revolts, and to capture runaway enslaved people wherever and wherever it was. That was part of the foundational mission of the New York City Police Department, long before all the other things, bells and whistles, we know about now. So it's important to understand what policing has meant in terms of this ongoing saga of Black America versus the rest of America. And I think that, when we see these incidents like what happened in Memphis, sadly, it's going to happen again. It's happened so many times before, and there's all the incidents that we don't even know about. Or where maybe nobody died, and so it doesn't make CNN and MSNBC and Brother Crump doesn't have to show up or something like that, or Al Sharpton, but they're still pretty serious if you get thrown down a flight of steps or whatever it might be. I've tried to. The last thing I would just say is I've tried to encourage any of my students who are going into the law profession and who are thinking about public service. Public defender is great, and Brother Akbar, I salute you with respect to the work that you've done. Noble, I am sure, but we need more Black people on the prosecution side. It is. I encourage us because the progressives in the last decade have you see it in Philadelphia, you see it here in New York, we're seeing it in other parts of the country, because that's where the real decisions are made with respect to some type of equity or inequity with respect to criminal justice. The district attorney decides who gets charged, the district attorney decides to tell the arresting police officer this charge is just a load. Oh, that's why I have to censor myself. Let's just say it's not useful, and they'll throw it out, or they decide who's going to get charged for what kind of sentencing, all of those things. And and I told my students, I said, being on defense means you're reacting to the other side, like in sports, or you're on defense. We need some people on the offensive side also. And so I think that's going to be the major change that we're probably going to be looking for, because it's great that we have more Black police officers, and we should have. But as we saw in Memphis, damn near every cop who beat that young man to death was Black. Okay. And so it's not enough just to have Black people on the police force. We need an overhaul of the entire criminal justice system so that criminal laws are being enforced in a equitable and a just and equitable way, which is not the case today.
Gotcha. Mutaqee, comments.
I agree, and I absolutely agree as far as like prosecutors being a part. More Black lawyers becoming prosecutors. And I think we have been in the reaction position for a long time. This quote I read in this book called Stamped, it says that the difference between the fight that we had in the 60s with the civil rights movement and the fight that we have now is that in the civil rights movement, there was a fight for fairness, and the fight that we have now is a fight for freedom. And the difference between the two is pretty much that we are now fighting for our right to live. So before we were fighting as far as fairness, like to be a part of the police force or to be prosecutors or to go to certain schools. But right now, we're literally fighting for our lives. And so when we become proactive in fighting for our life, we can change a lot more. Because like we said, the abuse has been there. From the creation of the police departments to now, it's been there. So now what are we doing proactively in order to change things? And that's becoming prosecutors, that's becoming a part of the political process. All those things I think we have to get involved in order to change the system that's in place. Because one of the things that we know now from Memphis is that it's just like the professor just said, it's not just having Black police officers, it's changing the system of abuse, this system of brutality, and this system of looking at Black men as purely criminals and animals, you know, for that extent, to that extent, and as a result, they treat them as such. So we can do things to change this system, whether it's the George Floyd Act, which I don't think goes far enough, but it's a start. But getting in there and really holding law enforcement accountable is what we have to do proactively and not reacting all the time to different events.
Excellent. And certainly, Jonathan, we certainly do know that a former president did not believe DNA evidence had exonerated anyone. Okay, that's one. And then two, also, correct me if I'm wrong, but was not the chokehold prohibitive on the New York City Police Department already? So what happened in St. Louis? So please.
Yeah, there was a. It's been in place for a while in the in their own guidelines that you can't use chokeholds. And but if I may, let me frame the issue slightly different, because I know there are bad cops out there, bad cops, white cops, Black cops, brown cops, Asian cops. But as what I've learned over the many years I've been doing this is that it's really the leadership of these departments that are at fault. They are the ones who tell their officers to go out and be aggressive. They're the ones who say, we don't care if you get sued. We don't care if the case ends up being tossed out. We just want you to go out and do what you do. And the best example of that was Ray Kelly, who was police commissioner during the time of the height of stop and frisk.
Yep.
And who, by the way, you might be interested to know, consulted with the Memphis Police Department back in 2016 to come up with programs to deal with their rise in crime. And one of the things he suggested was the Scorpion Unit. Scorpion, the first two letters of Scorpion are street crime. And that harkens back to, in New York, what we had was the street crime unit that killed Amadou Diallo.
Yes.
And so it's really about police leadership, and it's about what they say to their officers and what they do, what they want them to do. And there was a chilling piece of evidence in our street crime trial, which was also called Floyd, but it was a different Floyd. Daniel Floyd was the lead plaintiff. But in that trial, Eric Adams testified for us.
Oh, okay.
At the time, he was a state senator.
Correct.
He came into court, federal court, and testified. He was at a meeting with Governor Patterson and Ray Kelly in the governor's office up in or maybe it was down here in New York. And they were asking Ray Kelly, why do you do this? Why do you keep using this stop and frisk? Nobody likes it. You've lost all sense of trust in the community. And he said, and this, you can go back to the record, it's on the record in, open court, federal court. He said, Eric Adams said that Ray Kelly said that we use this tactic to instill fear in the minds of every young Black and brown kid that whenever they go on the street, they're going to be stopped.
Wow.
That's the leadership of the NYPD at the time saying that. So that's your leadership. What do you think the officers are going to do?
Well, if I might, just on that point, and it just occurred to me, and I've had this conversation with any number of my white friends, which is that when my son, turn about 7 or 8, and he could go to the store by himself, or he could, maybe take the bus to go to school, those kinds of things, in the daytime, obviously. I had a conversation with him, and it was about what to do if you encounter the police. And there was just a list of don'ts. Do not run ever. Do not talk back. Obviously, do not resist. Again, do not run. And it said, and be as respectful as possible. And all you really want to do is be able to get to a phone so you can call me. Okay, but
Mhm.
and I would tell my white friends, you don't have that conversation
Yeah,
by and large with your 8 or
yeah,
9-year-old
it's true.
young white boy, because the police are your friend. The police are somebody that you could look out for, and you can believe my son's mother. And I never spoke disrespectfully about the police, but I also knew that that would not be enough to keep him alive.
Mhm.
Should he run across a couple of cops who are having a bad day, and
Mhm.
unless and until Black parents do not need to have that kind of conversation with their young children, boys and girls, um, uh, uh, that's where we'll see a marker of progress. When we don't have to do that anymore, that's when we can know there's progress. And so right now, we're not there. I don't think we're even close. Whether
Yeah,
it's in
it's about,
Memphis,
if I may, it's about changing the culture and
yep.
to change the culture in an organization like the NYPD, which has 35,000 sworn officers and another 25,000 civilian personnel. You're talking about an organization that has 60,000 people in it. To change the culture in that kind of an organization will not happen overnight.
Mhm.
It takes generations, but you have to start with doing the right thing. You have to make sure the officers you're hiring, whatever their color, are psychologically fit to be
Mhm.
police officers. You
Mhm.
know, I don't know if folks remember back in the days of Michael Stewart. Remember Michael Stewart?
Yep. Yep. Absolute graffiti artist.
Yes.
Yep. Yep.
I represented his family as well in against the NYPD, and one of the incredibly telling things about that case was that the officer who was most responsible for his death um, had been rejected as psychologically unfit by the NYPD to be
Wow.
an officer, but was hired by the Transit Police Department as
Oh
an officer.
wow.
So,
Wow.
I mean, you would think that they would talk to each other, but those kind of psychological examinations that they need to be done of officers before they get into this job, because it's a job that gives them a lot of power. And if they're young kids, and especially if they're from the suburbs or wherever they're from, and different cultures, and it's a volatile situation. So you got to make
Mhm.
sure you're getting the right people.
Absolutely. And Mutaqee, now you heard Professor Wallace in terms of the talk. So
Right.
have you had to have that talk? Because your son, of course, is younger, but have you
Yeah.
had any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, my son is 5, and right now he's excited when he sees law enforcement, and I think
Mhm.
that's a good place to start.
Uh-huh.
'Cause one of the things that I hear law enforcement say all the time is like, stop telling your kids you're going to call the police on them if they're acting up, or I'm gonna go get that police officer to get you in trouble. So they don't they want to start developing a positive relationship with law enforcement from a very young age. So I haven't had that talk yet. I'm want to get him excited and still happy to see law enforcement. But I think somebody need to have that same conversation with law enforcement to have positive relationships and positive interactions with the community. So I haven't had that talk yet, but I know I'm going to have to
Mhm.
because I had that talk. I was, wasn't getting in anything, wasn't getting in any trouble, but my father and my mom, they said, hey, if you get stopped, keep your hands on the wheel, don't
Mhm.
talk back, be respectful, because the idea is to get home
Mhm.
and on.
Mhm.
And I just want to, kind of pivot back, like in the same conversation. Um, as far as I think what it takes to change is just the culture of policing in general.
Mhm.
And so whenever I have these conversations with law enforcement from the top down, this idea that we have to police by being forceful or being intimidating,
Mhm.
or they like to say, we got to meet force with force, so we are allowed to escalate, force with force. So when somebody has an attitude, then that allows the police officer to have like a bigger attitude instead of trying to de-escalate the situation or ease it down. It's always like we have to be bigger than you if I'm a police officer.
Mhm.
And so in that same conversation, we can go all the way back to 1994 with the Joe Biden crime bill that
Mhm.
led to mass incarceration. Their excuse or their explanation for the crime bill, and even now when we see over policing in the Black community, they always go back to say, well, we have the elders in these communities that say that they want more police to enforce crime because they're getting terrorized by, quote unquote criminals. So we have to police this way in order to, keep your community safe. They have this savior complex. At least that's what they speak of, but it turns into mass incarceration. It turns into excessive force. But if they change this culture of policing to say that we can bring crime down or we can enforce crime in other ways, like, community policing, having relationships with people in the community, actually talking to people, finding out what they need, addressing mental health, looking at drug abuse from a public health standpoint instead of a way to put more Black men in prison. But all of that changes the philosophy of policing, because right now it's lock them up, throw away the key, and show that I'm the bigger person as the police officer, not the bigger person, but the more macho person as the police officer. Until they change that culture, the idea of making communities safer is excessive force, and what I think is bad policing, over policing our communities.
Gotcha.
Speaking about, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll go Wallace and then you, Jonathan. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Wallace.
Okay. No problem. Just on that point of culture, and it just has to be said, right? Which is that we have a culture issue in many of our Black communities. I live in Harlem. I was born in Harlem, lived here most of my life, and over the last, you pick a number, 40, 50 years, the idea of being violent, being being an outlaw, if you will, and all that has been propagated through our music, and it's become very popularized, and people have, their stage names of things like Little Mafia, whatever the heck they call themselves these days, and somehow romanticizing this notion of violence. And you add to that cultural broth, if you will, the heightened access to guns, and the lyrics that you see in many of the on these rap presentations has to do with using guns. Okay, and you're putting that message out 24/7 to young, impressionable people who in many instances may not have other cultural options that they see, and there almost is not a day goes by right here in New York City where somebody's getting shot, and it's sometimes it's a white person doing the shooting, sometimes it's a Latino doing the shooting, but most of the time it's in the Black community. And when I was last thing I'll just say is when I was president of Harlem Lawyers Association years ago, testifying in Congress, I said, nobody, at the time we were talking about over policing with respect to drug use and not enough focus with respect to street crime and the like. And I was saying, most people don't really care if somebody wants to go in there on the rooftop or in the basement someplace and get high, but fine. But so we don't want fewer police. We want police to focus on public safety. And but that doesn't mean, to Mr. Moore's point, that you have to beat people upside the head and somehow make them afraid. And last point is that the first Black commissioner of the NYPD, Lee Brown, who was appointed during the Dinkins administration, was indeed ostensibly in a position to try and change that culture. But the culture of the NYPD is inbred for decades and generations. And once they got rid of mandatory occupancy in the city, we've become kind of like the police in many instances is like an occupation force, and all they want to do is be able to. And I understand this, and I think we should all understand. They want to go home at the end of the night. Okay, they want to go home safely at the end of the night, and there's too many people walking around dramatizing, romanticizing the use of guns and actually using them. And so, if it's between me, the police officer living in Rockland County or out in Suffolk County or something like that, going home, or this person who may or may not have a gun, but that's the culture that I see around here. It's not a binary choice. And so we have to address the fact that we need to change the culture within our community as well. Okay? We can't just say, yeah, that's cool. That's just rap being rap and freedom of expression and all of that. No. There are limitations to all rights, and the right to get people to go out and think it's okay to bust a cap in somebody's ass is not my idea of. It's not even good lyrics.
Jonathan.
Well, no, I think that the issue of how we look at the police is really important. Obviously, it can't be just with this sort of, well, we need them and they should just do what they want to do. Yes, we need them. And if you go to any community in New York City, they'll say, we don't want you to take the police out. We don't want
Right.
to, we can tell you what neighborhood, what corner people are selling drugs on. We can tell you where the problems are. We just want you to do your job constitutionally.
Right.
Don't abuse people's rights. And
Right.
in the stop and frisk trial, they kept saying, well, we need stop and frisk because it's what keeps crime down. And you know, and if you don't give us this power, this tool in our tool bag, you're going to see an explosion in crime. In fact, you know, from a high of 700,000 a year stops that were happening in the year 2012. At the end of our, as a result of the case, the number of stops have gone down to about, at least reported stops, between 10 and 15,000. So think about the difference there. And also, most importantly, is that during that period of time when the stops were going down, crime was going down. So,
Wow.
which was the best illustration of how this tactic that seemed like, oh, that, you know, this is a tough guy tactic. Let's just go in and just stop everybody. Didn't work. It does engender a lot of distrust in the community, and now we're paying, and we pay for that for generations.
So tell me, so if you had to take one or two factors specifically to address or being able to hold police accountable, what might those be? Of course, we all often hear about qualified immunity, right?
Yeah, well, that's
One
a
of
whole
the things-
different. That's a whole. Yeah, that should be gone. But let me give you two examples. Two
Go
things
ahead.
that you do. One is they got to do a better job of screening every police. I don't care what their color is. All police officers.
Okay.
You can't have people who have psychological problems walking around the city carrying guns. And knowing that they have the power to do it, and knowing that they can act with impunity. In other words, knowing that if they do something wrong, nothing's going to happen. Because in fact, the level of discipline in the police department is so low and so unthreatening to officers that they don't even pay it much mind, even though they complain about it. So that's the second thing I think that really needs to be focused on, is you have to have a better discipline against police officers who violate the law, violate the regulations. You know, you can't just give them a slap on the wrist, and you have to evaluate them as to whether they should continue as police officers. There's a lot of jobs out there people can do, and nobody wants to take your job away. But being a police officer is different than being delivering the mail or whatever it may be. You know, you're carrying a gun, you're carrying a lethal weapon. Not only a gun, but you have a taser, you have an asp, which is a modern version of a baton. You can inflict a lot of harm on people.
Yes.
And if you engage in misconduct, you should be disciplined. And unfortunately, a couple of days ago, the police commissioner, Keishant Sewell, said, we want to lessen the penalties, lower the penalties for officers who are found guilty of violating regulations. That's just exactly the wrong way to go.
Totally.
Now, we
Wallace.
also have the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Do you think that's been an effective mechanism for interacting with police situations where we have complaints?
Well, the CCRB, which of course has been around for a long time, and we're still seeing these issues to this very day. So I think it's a useful tool in the toolbox, if you will. I think we're going to have to rethink. As was mentioned, we have 60,000 people working in the New York City Police Department. It's the largest municipal police department in the world. The only entity that has a larger budget than NYPD is the New York City Department of Education, trying to educate 1.5 million kids. So it's a massive infrastructure, which having been in executive positions in the past, the bigger the infrastructure is, the more difficult it is to change the culture, particularly I can speak to this from experience. When you have an operation like the NYPD, or I would point out as well, just the New York City governmental structure, they'll wait out a commissioner, because commissioners come and go.
Yeah.
The NYPD, the city government infrastructure, and not talking about the commissioners, we're talking about the people who do the work every day. They'll wait out a mayor. Okay. And if the mayor doesn't get a second term, which is what happened with David Dinkins, for example, the changes that he wanted to see just did not happen. Okay. But places like Atlanta with Maynard Jackson, or with Washington, D.C. with Marion Barry, Harold Washington in
Chicago,
and Tom Bradley in L.A. In every single instance, they got a second term. And so, if Eric Adams, I consider him a friend. I admire him, whatever. But there's a lot of things in it. A magician is not one of them, and he's dealing with an infrastructure that's set, if not in stone, it's certainly set to be there and outlast him. So unless and until the changes that he's talking about, or the commissioner is talking about, go into a second term, you'll see an immediate rollback with respect to whatever else people have been trying to do.
Absolutely.
Part of the issue when you talk about this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, Leah. Mutaqee, I got you. So now you heard about, of course, the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Is there a similar apparatus there in Tallahassee?
We do. We have an advisory board for law enforcement, and they also have a review board. I don't think it has enough teeth. The one we have now, they'll look at complaints, they'll make recommendations to the chief of police, but it's up to the chief of police to actually implement whatever recommendations that they have in place. It's become more of like a political ceremonial tool position in response, because ours was created after the summer of 2020 as a way to say, okay, we'll put this in place for accountability and transparency. But it seems more ceremonial than anything. And one of the things, I think the reason why it does not have any teeth, I'm not sure how it is in New York and other places, but our police union has a lot of influence on our, on the politicians in our city, our mayor and our city commissioners. And so they will agree to certain things, but kind of put the brakes on if it goes too far. So I think one of the things that we can do is be more like, put up more of a fight against the police unions, because they seem to have more of the control over our over the people who have the power, the city managers and our city mayor. So I think, one of those factors would be addressing the police unions and kind of like taking away some of that power that they have. And another factor I think that we can do, even like using these review boards more, and also just directly with law enforcement. I tell a lot of people who come to me with complaints that I say, well, maybe that's not quite at the point where we can file a lawsuit, but make the report, document it, and that way it goes into that officer's file. And so maybe this time it's not enough for a lawsuit or to, get that person fired. But if he keeps getting these same complaints, he stopped me for no reason, or he was, rude to me, or, I feel like it was excessive force, those things go in their file. And then sooner or later, a civil rights attorney will be able to pull that file and say, hey, this guy has, 10 complaints from the same area, and you didn't do anything about it. Now we can address it. So it's educating the community on ways that they can, like protect themselves and protect the community by filing complaints, pulling those body cam videos, because we have those here, pulling those body cam videos, putting that in the file as well, so we can go back and, like I said, if an issue keeps happening with the same officer, and usually it was, that would be something that's in their file.
Gotcha. Jonathan.
Yeah, the issue of civilian complaint review boards is a complicated one. Of course, we have very weak unions here in New York. The unions have always opposed the creation of the Civilian Complaint Review Board. And if you remember back, the reason why David Dinkins only got one term because he proposed a Civilian Complaint Review Board, and there was a guy named Rudy Giuliani who opposed, you remember he had a rally out in front of City Hall with it.
Yes, indeed.
Criminal conduct. and egged on by Rudy Giuliani. Gee, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? And
Yes, it did.
He was rehearsing. He was
He was
rehearsing.
rehearsing.
Yeah.
and so there's been a struggle over the CCRB here in New York. Recently, they got the power to actually do the trials of people who they've decided should be tried for violating departmental regulations. If you remember, the only forum in which Daniel Pantaleo had to respond to what happened to Eric Garner was in a trial done by the CCRB within the and he ended up getting fired. But that was a rare exception. But the problem with the CCRB, even today in New York City, is that whatever they end up doing, whether it's recommended that there be a finding of guilt or what the punishment is, it still can be reviewed by the police commissioner.
Right.
So it's not independent of the police department, and that has to be changed. I mean, there's no reason why competent judicial folks who are working in a separate agency within the city government, they have the office, the oath office in New York City, which is a adjudicated body that could handle this. If somebody violates regulations and does it repeatedly and has a history of it, and the recommendation is to fire them, they should be fired without having the police commissioner come along and say, "Well, I think that's too harsh."
Gotcha. Well, answer me this question, okay? And this is something. So we saw, of course, George Floyd some years ago, right? But then we had this most recent incident in Memphis. Now, certainly with George Floyd, he was killed some months, and then months later, finally, charges were brought.
Yeah.
But it seemed in Memphis, like, these charges came, as they say, swiftly. Is that because this incident is that much radically different, or will I say because the officers were black? Somebody weigh in.
Yeah, I don't think it's because the officers were black. I think Memphis sadly has had a number of incidents in place. I think I know the police chief. She's been in office about a year or so, and I think her, at least my sense is that she wanted to get out ahead of this, and there was really no reason not to fire these guys right away, based on it was their video, body cameras from their bodies, so it's not like some external witness was talking about this, and I don't think it's because they were black. I think perhaps one thought is that the video camera just showed how horrific the treatment of this human being was by other human beings who happen to be employees of the city of New York, of the city of Memphis, and members of the Memphis PD. And I think her decision was, we just can't. This may send a message to the rest of the officers that this is just absolutely unacceptable conduct. The sad part is that her actions are unusual. Usually it takes weeks, it takes months.
Yes.
Attorney General Loretta Lynch could have brought civil rights charges against the I think the officer Pantaleo, who actually choked Eric Garner to death, and she sat on it. And she sat on it, and then of course, perhaps betting that her successor would be appointed by President Hillary Clinton instead of successor was appointed by
Jeff Sessions,
Donald Trump. Donald Trump, and so I hold her responsible for that. I don't begrudge anything that she's done in the private sector since then, except of course defend the NFL owners against charges of discrimination by black coaches, which again, it's like, okay, it's great that we have black people in all of these positions and getting all of these honorifics and going to all these schools, but if you're going to come around and basically defend white institutions, I'm not quite sure it was worth the sacrifice. In fact, I'm positive it wasn't worth the sacrifice.
Yeah.
And
the interesting thing about Loretta Lynch is that she and Eric Holder as well, they looked at Eric Garner's wife straight in the eye and said, "We are going to prosecute these cops."
Right? Wow.
And yet promised them that they would do that, and they never did. And part of the reason they didn't do it is because there was so much opposition from the local FBI agency here in New York and the the attorneys in the Eastern District, which at the time included Loretta Lynch, who did not want to prosecute these cops. And it wasn't just, by the way, it wasn't just Pantaleo, because Eric Garner didn't die just from a chokehold. He died from a combination of chest compression and chokehold. And that chest compression and chokehold was resulted from not just one officer, but several officers on top of Eric Garner, which made him unable to breathe. And so, so Loretta Lynch entirely dropped the ball.
Gotcha.
I don't care what the Trump administration would have done afterwards. They had an obligation to indict those officers.
And they passed on that. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, and as importantly, they've never been held accountable.
One of them lost his job, but that was it. The other ones are back on.
Who lost their job?
Pantaleo, he was fired.
Oh yeah. Well, with a pension though.
Yeah.
He got to keep his pension, so it's like no harm, no foul. But I'm talking about Holder and Lynch, and
Yes.
I don't think it would have been a radical thing for them to prosecute Pantaleo and the rest of them. I don't think it would have been a radical act at all.
Gotcha. So now, and do tell me, Mutaqee, in Tallahassee, because we have, as you saw, Jonathan, in terms of saying the police union. What's the union like there?
They're pretty strong, and like I said, they were the ones who fought against our review board, or just like making sure that it doesn't have much teeth, that it's more ceremonial than anything. Right now, they're fighting is headed to the Florida Supreme Court. We have this law here called Marcy's Law, and it's kind of spreading throughout the country, where it deals with like victims' rights, but they've used it to not allow the media to put law enforcement's name, to publicize law enforcement officer's name if he's involved in a police shooting. And again, that's like kind of hiding behind the badge, not being transparent. And the police union are fighting it all the way to the Supreme Court. During 2020, we had 2 police shootings here in Tallahassee, and so they fought against releasing the body cam and those officers that was involved in the shooting. And again, it's a way to like limit accountability, limit transparency, because if that name is released, even if the police is exonerated or the grand jury said it was a quote unquote good shooting, what if this officer has a reputation for using excessive force or mistreating people in the community? I think that would be relevant in the conversation, to see whether what he did was right or wrong. So they're really like fighting against transparency and accountability here. And I think that's just the way they are nationally. Like the less accountability, the less transparency, the more that we can run freely and do what we want.
Gotcha.
Can I add one other thing, Curtis? Here,
yes. Go ahead.
One of the most troubling aspects of these cases, and you see it in the George Floyd case, you see it in Tyre Nichols, you see it in the Eric Garner matter, and a lot of it is that there was in many cases somebody who was the initiator of the misconduct and sort of taking the lead, and a lot of the other officers just standing around watching it, not intervening. I mean, let's be clear. Under the Constitution, under our civil rights statutes, officers have a constitutional duty to intervene to protect somebody from being harmed, from the deprivation of their life, liberty, or property. That's their right under the 14th Amendment. And yet, you see it time and time again where officers are not, nothing happens to them. And one of the things that has happened recently in the law enforcement profession, and I think there are honest people looking at ways to make all this more transparent and try to decrease the number of these serious incidents, is to have a system where you encourage officers to intervene. And you do it on a very basic fundamental principle. You say to the officer, why are you doing this? You're going to lose your pension. You're going to lose your house. You're going to lose your job. You want to do that to your family? Step back for a minute. Don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And they've tried this program in a couple of places like New Orleans, which had a history of
Yes.
police misconduct, and it's worked. It's worked incredibly. And so that's another one of the, when you get down into the sort of the nitty gritty of this, there's a lot of things that we could be doing both locally and nationwide to make police officers more responsive to what the community wants, not just what their leadership wants.
Gotcha.
Well, one thing that I would just mention is that at the latter part of last year, I was asked to participate on this. I guess it was a commission to in a historical review of a commission report from, let's say, 1935 with respect to policing issues in Harlem, 1935. And this was done by the LaGuardia administration. And you read that report. It was then 2022, and it's like it could have been written in 2022. Just change a few of the names. I mean, it's like, I won't say nothing has changed because that would be inaccurate, but it was so similar, whether we're talking about housing and education. In this case, our discussion with respect to police, because the report was commissioned after some violent police activity in Harlem, and so they said, okay, we're going to have a commission report, like the current report and all of those things. So we're going to do that, and they came out with a report, and it was like, as I said, it could have been written today. And so unless and until, what they say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. We have to break that insanity circle and understand. And I think, Brother Moore was just saying some of the things that, unless and until it becomes part of the normal, put it in quotes, conversation. So then as people are saying things like, well, the police have rights too, it's like, no, that's, yes, the police have rights too. And people have rights too. And, I respect the police because they literally put their lives on the line every day. But that does not give them the right to abuse and hurt and kill people because they thought it was a good idea. And just that last point about not publicizing the police officer's name when they're charged with something, because that might have some future. Well, they put the name up of anybody and everybody who's arrested for damn near anything on the radio, TV, and newspapers. And although we have a presumption of innocence, if somebody sees your name in the paper, your employer might say, maybe you ought to take some time off, like forever. Even though, but I'm not guilty. I'm not guilty.
Innocent.
I'm innocent until proven guilty. No, that's okay. And so I'm not feeling it with respect to the police on that
point. Night Watchman, how you doing, buddy?
Good. I think we want to start wrapping up, but I'd like everybody to just kind of give some final comments on what you think are the number one things that we can do to affect change at this point.
All right. We'll start with you, Jonathan.
I was hoping you wouldn't say that, so I could
give you a chance to think.
I think I'll say a couple of things. One is I think we have to understand, as I said in the beginning, that the issue is not a bad cop or there's a couple of bad eggs and apples in the barrel or whatever. And I don't like this focus on bad cops because I think that there's a lot of cops a lot of people who become cops do it for the right reasons. I don't care what their color is. They want to serve. They want to, they're for the right, and you want to encourage that, But I take issue with the leadership of these departments that encourage officers and try to benefit from officers breaking of the law. They did that in stop and frisk for years. They knew that officers were out there violating the rights, Fourth Amendment rights of everybody who they stopped. It was just beyond, 90% of those 700,000 stops that I talked about. Well, 90% led to no further police action.
Wow.
So think about that. If you have a system, if you have a program that fails 90% of the time, why you keep using it? And it's really about looking at the leadership of these departments and also more accountability, effective discipline, and also, and as I think one of the other participants say, more transparency about what they're doing.
Absolutely. Mutaqee.
I agree. For as far as like the transparency goes, and back to a point I made earlier, I think it's changing the conversation to a more proactive conversation about policing in general. I think we react to the things that we see on TV, in an emotional response, which is, I think, necessary when we see things like Tyre Nichols and Eric Garner. But unfortunately, in between those incidents, we need to have these proactive conversations from the top down about policing, changing the idea of policing, forming, a more, like bridging this gap between the community and the police. And until we do that, as far as changing the conversation, we won't change the culture. So it starts with changing the conversation, talk about redoing policing in order to try to change this culture of, this aggressive army style police force.
Yeah, and you're right. And I guess that's one of the things that we didn't touch on was the whole militarization of urban police forces. But yes, John, no, Wallace.
Yes, sir. Yeah. The one thing I would say, because this is one of the things that when I'm teaching students at Morehouse College, for example, we talk about civic engagement. Each person who is a citizen of this city, who cares about this issue, needs to convey that to their elected officials, because unless and until the elected officials understand that it's a serious priority, and it's not just the mayor, okay, or the borough president, but there's members of Congress, there are the legislators of the state assembly, the state senate, of course, city council, and all of those people who were elected, they need to have this as top of mind. But they're not going to have it as top of mind unless people are advised. People advise that this is a major concern, that police misconduct and safety from police is, I believe, more important than the issue of gentrification in Harlem, because actually just somebody must have walked out of a time capsule, because Harlem started gentrifying about 30-40 years ago, and so it's like, you just found that out. And in the meantime, though, people are being too often feeling, if not personally terrorized, are worried that could happen to them. And you shouldn't have to walk around in the city where you live and where you pay taxes and where you vote and be afraid of the police. And so, but that has to be conveyed by our elected officials to a much greater and stronger extent than what we see right now. People get sidetracked with some of these other issues, not that they're not important, but this is top of mind because it is literally a life and death issue.
Excellent. This has been a great discussion. And gentlemen, I'd like to also just keep the platform open, that when we see the unfolding events happen in Memphis, that let's say when there is a decision or quote unquote verdict, I'd like to have you guys come back on to give comments. Okay.
And I hope there's not a follow-up incident where we have to have you guys come back and talk about it, but I'm afraid that there probably will be.
Night Watchman, we already said that there will be, okay? You don't want to be Debbie Downer, but yes, we know.
But I appreciate all the comments that you gentlemen have given us, from talking about accountability and leadership, not only in the police department, but Jonathan, you made me think about the mayors that we've had and their culpability in terms of pursuing these policies. And so thank you all for joining us today. I also would recommend that people who are listening to this, if you didn't watch our last show, you might want to go back and watch that, because we had some Black law enforcement officers, and they had some very, very interesting comments as well. And I think their voices need to be heard on this. So you've been listening to Soul Lounge Primetime on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. We are also live streaming on YouTube and Facebook. You can always find us on Monday nights, but we are archived on every platform imaginable. We are on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts. I don't even know how many podcast platforms
we got on. We got a lot.
But look down in the comments below.
We're not on Tinder. No,
you're not on Tinder. Okay,
we don't know about Tinder. Maybe you'd like to explain that to us.
Listen, I'm an academic. I do all kinds of research.
It's research. Yeah, just clear your browser history after that. That's all.
You're skilled in the art of cross-examination.
Thank you. So thank you all for coming. You got an open invitation to come back and keep like, subscribe, and follow us. We've got something interesting for you next week. We don't even know what it is yet.
Gentlemen, thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.